Hey my dear future web developers. In our last lesson, we learned how to add images to make our portfolio website visually appealing. Today, we'll learn something super important: HTML forms. Forms allow us to collect user information like names, emails, and messages. By the end of this lesson, we'll add a contact form to our portfolio. Let's get started. A form is an area on a web page where users can enter data. Look on the screen at this Facebook page. It requires user input for login and for sign up a new user as well. Think about such other login pages, sign up forms, or contact forms. They all use HTML forms to collect information. Let's learn how to create one. Any HTML form can be created using a form opening and closing tag. All the form elements will go inside these tags. The form tag has one important attribute, that is action attribute. We need to collect data from user to process it, or in simple words, the browser will do actions according to user input. For example, if you give your username and password to log in, the data will go to somewhere to check if you are a valid user or not. So the action attribute will define where the form data is sent. The HTML form can contain one or more of the following form elements. Let's discuss the important one in detail. Let's start with the input tag. The input tag is used for collecting information. It is a self-closing tag. The input tag has a main attribute which is type attribute. We can set many different types for our input field. The input type equals text is used to collect one-line text input. The input type equals email ensures that user enter a valid email address and shows an error on wrong input. The input type password is used for hiding characters for taking password inputs. The input type date shows a date picker on the browser from where the user can select any date. There are many other input types as well. You can explore them from the link in the description below. With the input tag, we usually use a label tag. The label tag is used to define a label for an input element. You need to use the for attribute to link a label to an input's ID. The input ID attribute and label for attribute value should be same in order to link it with each other. When you link it together, clicking on the label focuses the associated input field. Next element is a text area. A text area is used for longer text input, like messages or comments. Unlike input, it has rows and columns to control its size. Sometimes, we need to give users options to choose from. That's where radio buttons and checkboxes come in. Radio buttons allow users to select only one option. You can create a radio button with an input tag with radio as its type. Use the same name attribute to group them. Checkboxes allow users to select multiple options. It can be created same as radio buttons. Here, we added checked, so it's selected by default. Just like radio buttons and checkboxes, we can also use a drop-down menu to let users select options. The select tag creates a drop-down list. Each option inside the drop-down is defined using the option tag. You can add multiple attribute to allow users to select more than one option, just like checkboxes. Buttons help users interact with the form. You can create buttons in HTML in two different ways. You can use a button tag, which is more flexible to add text and for styling. Or another way is to add a button using input tag with type button or submit. It's simple to use when styling is not needed. The type submit is used to send form data to the server. Today we have done a lot of theory. I am tired of reading now. Let's do some practical and see it in action. So, if you have completed the homework at part 2, you already have a contact.html page. If not, create a page and link it with other pages. Now, inside contact.html, I am going to write my HTML form. For this, I will write a form opening and closing tag. For now, just give it an action attribute. I have decided some fields for my form. First, let's write only labels for all the fields. My fields for the form are name, email, message, preferred contact method, Services interested in. Estimated budget. Let's see them in action. Let's open our My Website folder and open contact.html. You can see here all labels are written. But wait, there is an issue. Since labels are inline elements, they are all showing in the same line, which is not looking good. We need to add a line break after each label so that they can be shown in separate lines. For this, BR tag is used. I am giving BR tag after each label tag. Let's see it in action. Yes, now it looks good as expected. The form is missing a heading. Let's add a heading in the form. Let's refresh the page. Now the form is looking good with a heading. Now we need to take input from user for all these fields. For name field, I want a text box. So, I will create an input tag with type text. The name attribute value should be same as the label for attribute value. So, I am writing name here. Also give an ID to the input tag. Let's see it in action. Look, the label name and input field is bind with each other. When you click at name label, the corresponding text input gets automatically highlighted. The BR tag should come after input tag. Add one more. Looking good now. Let's add the same input field for email. Change the name attribute value as email and change its ID too. We have added a text type input field. So you can see it's not giving any validation errors on typing wrong format email address. Let's change the text type to email type and see what it does. Now see that on writing wrong email format, when you hover it, you will get an error that the input is not a valid email address. When you write a proper email address with an it.com, it will not show any error. Now for the message field, I want to give user a big text input field. So, instead of using input text, I will be using TEXTAREA here. I will create a text area with an opening and closing tag. Give it an ID and the name attribute value should be similar to label for value. You can use rows and calls attribute to give it a width and height. Oops. Columns should be more to display it more wider. Let's change 5 to 50 and see it in action. It's looking good now. You can write multiple line text input here. For preferred contact method, I need user to select only one from multiple options. For this reason, I am using radio buttons here. Label for value should be equal to input name value. And input type radio ID and its matching label for value should be equal. You can use checked attribute for a default selection like I did for email method. For services interested in, I am going to create checkboxes here so that user can select more than one value. It will be created same as radio buttons with type equals checkbox. Look here, a user can check multiple options unlike the radio buttons. You can also add a default checked for any option like we did for radio buttons. Now for our last field, I am going to add a drop-down for the user so that our form looks more interesting. For this, create a select opening and closing tag. Inside these tags, give option tags for all the options. Option tags have opening and closing tags too. It's looking great now. We have only one important element in our form left now. Every form needs a button to submit data to the server. Sending data to the server is backend programming, which is not included in this course. But let's create a button and see the form in action. Our form looks complete now. Now, it's your turn. Create a feedback form and ask user to rate your portfolio using radio buttons from 1 to 5. You can make your feedback form more interesting using multiple input fields. The source code link is attached in the description. You can also find additional resources in the description to learn HTML forms in more depth. Today we have learned a lot about how to create a HTML form. Different input types and attributes, how to use label, TEXTAREA, select and button form elements. In the next video, we will structure our web page using div, span, ID and classes. Stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our exciting lessons.